She disguised herself to test her son, but the one she distrusted saw her first and changed everything. At 72, Eleanor Whitmore stood outside a farmhouse she barely recognized as her son's life, dressed in clothes that erased who she was. She had come to prove a quiet suspicion that the woman who married her son had taken him away. But when the door opened, it wasn't rejection that met her. It was something she hadn't prepared for. Have you ever judged someone before truly knowing them? Tell me honestly, yes or no. The house had a rhythm that never changed. At exactly 6 every morning, Eleanor Whitmore rose from her bed, her movements slow but deliberate, as if time itself had taught her to conserve energy. She made her way to the kitchen, where the kettle was already waiting on the stove, placed precisely where she had left it the night before. The sound of water heating, soft at first, then rising into a steady hum, was the first voice she heard each day. It was a quiet house. Too quiet, perhaps. At 72, Eleanor had perfected the art of structure. Breakfast at 6:30, the morning paper at 7, a short walk around the block by 8. She followed the routine not because she needed to, but because without it, the hours stretched too wide, too empty. The clock above the stove ticked loudly as she poured her tea. Across the room, lying near the back door, Atlas lifted his head. The German Shepherd had been with her for nearly 6 years now. He was large, strong, with a coat that had begun to show faint traces of gray around his muzzle. His eyes followed her carefully, not with excitement, but with quiet attention, as if he were always measuring something just beneath the surface. "You're up early?" Eleanor said softly, though she knew he always was. Atlas didn't move right away. He simply watched her. Eleanor carried her tea into the living room and sat in her usual chair by the window. Outside, the neighborhood was just beginning to wake. A car door slammed in the distance. Somewhere down the street, a lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically against the sidewalk. She reached for her phone on the side table. The screen lit up, empty. No missed calls, no messages. Her thumb hovered for a moment before she tapped the contact she knew by heart. Marcus. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. She listened closely, as if she could hear something beyond the sound, something in the silence between the rings. And then it clicked. Voicemail. Eleanor didn't speak. She ended the call before the tone finished. For a moment, she sat very still, the phone still in her hand, the faint reflection of her face staring back at her from the dark screen. The woman looking back seemed composed, controlled, but there was something else there too, something harder to name. Across the room, Atlas rose quietly and moved closer, his nails clicking softly against the wooden floor. He stopped just beside her chair, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his presence. "He's busy," Eleanor said, more to herself than to the dog. "That's all." Atlas didn't respond, of course, but he didn't look away either. Eleanor set the phone down with careful precision, aligning it with the edge of the table. Her fingers lingered there for a moment, pressing lightly against the smooth surface as if anchoring herself. Marcus hadn't always been like this. There had been a time when his voice filled this house, loud, careless, full of energy. A time when he called without reason, just to talk. When he asked her advice even when he didn't need it. When she knew without question that she was still part of his world. But that had been before. Before Lena. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting toward the window, though she wasn't really seeing anything outside. Her mind moved elsewhere, retracing old conversations, old impressions. Lena had never fit. Not from the beginning. Too quiet. Too reserved. There was something about the way she spoke, soft, careful, as if she were always choosing her words, that had unsettled Eleanor. It felt calculated, controlled in a way that didn't belong in their family, and the way Marcus had changed after marrying her. The calls became shorter, less frequent. Holidays felt distant. Even when they were together, there was a kind of separation, like a thin pane of glass that no one acknowledged, but everyone felt. Eleanor had tried at first. She had invited Lena into conversations, asked polite questions, offered small gestures of welcome. But every attempt had seemed to disappear into that same quiet distance. And over time, Eleanor had stopped trying. She told herself it was Lena's doing, that Lena had pulled Marcus away, gently but firmly, into a life that no longer included her. It was easier to believe that. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees, scattering a few dry leaves across the sidewalk. Atlas shifted his weight and lowered himself beside her chair, resting his head lightly against her knee. Eleanor exhaled slowly, her hand moving almost automatically to his fur. It was warm beneath her fingers, solid and real in a way nothing else seemed to be anymore. "At least you're still here," she murmured. Atlas remained still, but his ears twitched slightly, catching the softness in her voice. The house settled around them, the quiet deepening as the morning passed. Eleanor picked up her tea again, though it had already begun to cool. She took a small sip, her eyes returning once more to the phone on the table. It didn't ring, and somehow that silence felt louder than anything else. Atlas lifted his head again, watching her, not just looking, but observing, as if he understood more than he should. Eleanor didn't notice. She was still listening for a call that never came. The rest of the morning passed the way all her mornings did. Quiet, measured, predictable. She folded the newspaper neatly after reading only half of it. She rinsed her cup and placed it upside down on the drying rack. She even stepped outside for her walk, moving along the same sidewalk she had followed for years, nodding politely to neighbors who barely slowed long enough to return the gesture. But something had shifted. The silence from earlier hadn't faded. It had settled. By the time she returned home, the house felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the unanswered call and were holding it there. Atlas followed her inside, his pace steady, his eyes never straying far from her. When she paused in the hallway, he stopped too, but watching her with the same quiet focus he had shown all morning. Eleanor stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned, not toward the kitchen or the living room, but toward the small spare bedroom at the end of the hall. She hadn't used that room in years. The door creaked slightly as she pushed it open. Dust hung faintly in the sunlight that slipped through the blinds. The room still held remnants of a life that no longer existed. Old boxes stacked neatly, a folded blanket on the bed, a chair no one had sat in for a long time. Eleanor stepped inside slowly. Atlas remained in the doorway. She moved toward the closet and opened it. Inside, behind a row of neatly hung coats, sat a plastic storage bin she hadn't touched in over a decade. She pulled it out, setting it carefully on the bed. For a moment, she just looked at it. Then she lifted the lid. Inside were things she had kept but never needed. Old scarves, worn sweaters, a pair of shoes that had long since lost their shape, clothes from another time, from a version of herself that no longer existed. Her fingers hovered over the fabric before finally brushing against it. Rough, faded, unremarkable. Eleanor exhaled slowly. The thought had come to her earlier, quietly at first, like something she could ignore. But it had stayed, grown, taken shape in the empty space left by silence. "If I stood in front of them," she murmured, almost testing the words aloud, "if I had nothing, would they even see me?" Atlas shifted slightly, his posture tightening. Eleanor didn't look at him. She lifted one of the sweaters, a dull brown, stretched at the sleeves, and held it up. Oh, it didn't resemble anything she would normally wear. That was the point. Her mind moved quickly now, assembling the idea piece by piece. She would go to Marcus's house, not as his mother, as a stranger, someone who had nothing, someone who needed help. And then she would know. The clarity of it sent a strange chill through her chest. It felt wrong, and yet, it felt undeniable. "I need to know," she said, more firmly this time. Atlas stepped into the room. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He simply stood there watching her, his body still but alert in a way that made the air feel tight. Eleanor glanced at him briefly. "It's not what you think," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure what he might be thinking. She set the sweater aside and reached deeper into the bin, pulling out a pair of worn pants. The fabric was thin, The knees slightly frayed. She ran her hand over them, imagining the transformation. No jewelry, no makeup, no recognition. She would erase herself. The idea should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, it steadied her. She closed the lid of the bin and sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap. For a moment, she allowed herself to picture it. The farmhouse, the door, Lena standing there. Would she hesitate? Would she turn her away? Eleanor's jaw tightened. "She will," she whispered. Atlas took a step closer. Eleanor looked up at him now. Really looked. There was something in his eyes she couldn't quite place. Not confusion, not fear. Awareness. As if he understood that what she was about to do wasn't just unusual, it was something deeper. Something that couldn't be undone once it began. Eleanor held his gaze for a second longer than she intended, then looked away. "It's just a visit," she said. "That's all." But even as the words left her mouth, they felt incomplete. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. Eleanor stood, her decisions settling into place with a kind of finality she hadn't expected. She gathered a few of the clothes from the bin and folded them carefully, placing them on the chair. Then she reached up and removed the small gold necklace from around her neck. It had been there for years. She held it in her hand for a moment before setting it down on the dresser. One piece at a time. Atlas didn't move. He watched as Eleanor began to strip away the details that made her who she was. Small things, ordinary things, but together they formed something essential. When she finished, she stood in the center of the room, surrounded by fragments of her own life. And for the first time, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not fear, not regret. Something closer to unease, as if she had stepped too far already. Atlas lowered himself slowly onto the floor, his eyes never leaving her. Eleanor drew a breath, steadying herself. "It's the only way," she said quietly. The words lingered in the room unanswered. The next morning did not follow the usual rhythm. The kettle still sat on the stove, untouched. The clock still ticked above it, steady and indifferent. But Eleanor did not move through her routine. She stood instead in the hallway, dressed in clothes that felt foreign against her skin. The brown sweater hung loosely on her frame. The worn pants dragged slightly at her ankles. Her hair, usually pinned neatly in place, fell unbrushed around her face. She had washed it the night before but left it to dry without care, letting it settle into uneven waves that made her look older, or perhaps simply unseen. She studied herself in the mirror. For a long moment she didn't recognize the woman looking back. That, she realized, was the point. Atlas stood behind her, his reflection visible just over her shoulder. His posture was rigid, alert, not protective in the usual sense, but attentive in a way that felt different, as if he were watching not for danger, but for truth. Eleanor turned away first. "We're going," she said quietly. The words sounded heavier out loud. She moved toward the door, her steps slower than she intended. The house felt different now, and as if it already knew she was leaving it in a way she never had before. Not for groceries, not for a walk, for something else, something uncertain. She reached for the handle, then paused. Her eyes drifted back into the house, the living room, the chair by the window, the phone still resting on the table exactly where she had left it. Still silent. Eleanor opened the door. Cool morning air slipped inside, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and distant traffic. She stepped out onto the porch, Atlas following without hesitation, though he stayed close, closer than usual. The car sat in the driveway. Eleanor approached it, then stopped. If she drove there, it would be too easy, too familiar, too close to the life she was trying to step outside of. She turned away from it. "We'll walk," she murmured. Atlas's ears twitched, but he said nothing, simply falling into step beside her as she moved down the sidewalk. The neighborhood passed quietly around them. Houses with trimmed lawns, mailboxes neatly aligned. A woman watering her plants glanced up as Eleanor passed, but only briefly. Her gaze slid away just as quickly, uninterested. Eleanor felt it immediately. The difference. It wasn't dramatic. No one stared. No one reacted. They simply didn't see her. By the time she reached the end of the block, something inside her had shifted again. She kept walking. The sidewalks gave way to wider roads. The houses grew farther apart, the air quieter. Cars passed occasionally, their drivers focused ahead, not once turning their heads. Atlas remained beside her, his pace steady, his gaze moving more than hers, watching the road, the passing cars, the spaces between things, watching everything. Eleanor adjusted the strap of the small canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Inside, she carried only what she thought she might need. Water, a few folded clothes, nothing more. The weight of it pressed lightly against her side, a constant reminder of what she had chosen. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, warming the road beneath her feet. The landscape began to change, the neat order of suburbia dissolving into something rougher, less defined. Fields stretched out beyond fences. Trees stood in uneven clusters. The sound of the city faded behind her. She was getting closer. Her steps slowed, not from exhaustion, but from something else. Doubt. Eleanor stopped at the edge of a dirt road that led deeper into the countryside. She stood there, staring down it, and her breath catching slightly as the reality of what she was about to do settled in fully. "This is where he lives," she said, almost to herself. Atlas stepped forward, then stopped, turning his head back toward her. Waiting. Eleanor looked at him. For a moment, she saw not just a dog, but something steadier, something certain. A presence that didn't question, didn't judge, but didn't ignore either. "Do you think this is a mistake?" she asked softly. Atlas didn't move. The wind shifted, rustling through the dry grass along the roadside. Eleanor exhaled. "I've already come this far." She stepped onto the dirt road. Each footstep felt louder now, the crunch of gravel beneath her shoes echoing in the open space. The farmhouse appeared slowly in the distance, small at first, barely visible between the trees, then gradually taking shape. White siding, slightly weathered. A porch that wrapped around the front. Simple. Unimpressive. Real. Eleanor slowed again as she approached. There were signs of life everywhere. Children's toys scattered near the steps. A line of laundry moving gently in the breeze. A garden stretching out beside the house. Rows of green against the earth. This was where Marcus lived. Not the world she had imagined for him. Not the life she had pictured. Eleanor's chest tightened. Atlas moved ahead slightly, then stopped near the gate, turning back once more to look at her. Waiting. Eleanor reached the wooden latch. Her hand hovered there. For the first time since leaving the house, her confidence faltered completely. "What am I doing?" she whispered. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Behind her, the road stretched back toward everything she knew. In front of her, the house stood quietly, unchanged, unaware of the storm she was about to bring to its door. Atlas sat down beside her, still, watching. Eleanor swallowed, her fingers tightening around the latch. "I need to know," she said again, though the words felt less certain now. She pushed the gate open. It creaked softly, the sound carrying across the yard. And with that small movement, Eleanor Whitmore stepped fully into a life that was no longer her own. The yard stretched out before her, quiet but alive in small, ordinary ways. A rusted tricycle lay on its side near the porch steps. A line of shirts and children's clothes swayed gently in the breeze, their colors faded but clean. Somewhere behind the house, a chicken clucked lazily, the sound oddly comforting in its simplicity. Eleanor moved forward slowly, her steps uncertain now. Up close, the farmhouse revealed its imperfections. Paint chipped at the edges, wood worn smooth by years of use. A porch railing that had been repaired more than once. It wasn't the kind of place she had imagined for her son. It was smaller, simpler, and somehow warmer. Atlas walked just behind her, his presence steady, his eyes scanning everything. He didn't bark, didn't pull, but there was a tension in the way he carried himself, like a quiet alertness that hadn't been there before. Eleanor reached the bottom of the porch steps and stopped. Her breath caught. This was it. She could still turn around. The road was behind her, the silence of her own home, the safety of her routines, all still within reach. But something inside her, something stubborn and unresolved, pushed her forward. She climbed the steps. Each one creaked beneath her weight, the sound sharp in the stillness of the morning. When she reached the door, she paused again, her hand hovering inches from the wood. Atlas stood beside her now, still, watching. Eleanor lifted her hand and knocked. The sound echoed more loudly than she expected. Then silence. A long, stretching silence that made her chest tighten. She almost turned away. Then, footsteps. Soft at first, then clearer, approaching from inside. Eleanor straightened instinctively, then caught herself, forcing her shoulders to relax, her posture to sink into something smaller, less certain. The handle turned. The door opened. Lena stood there. For a brief moment, Eleanor didn't recognize her. But the memory she had carried, sharp, distant, carefully judged, didn't match the woman standing in front of her now. Lena's hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands escaping around her face. She wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, and her hands were lightly dusted with flour. There was no hesitation in her eyes, only surprise, and then something else. Concern. "Oh," Lena said softly, her gaze taking in Eleanor's worn clothes, her tired posture. "Are you all right?" Eleanor froze. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had prepared herself for dismissal, for suspicion, for that polite distance she had always felt from this woman. Instead, Lena stepped forward. "You look exhausted," she continued, her voice gentle but steady. "Have you been walking?" Eleanor opened her mouth, but no words came at first. Chatty Atlas stepped onto the porch fully now, his eyes fixed on Lena, watching. Eleanor began, forcing herself into the role she had chosen. "I've been traveling. I was wondering if—" Her voice faltered. Lena didn't let her finish. "Come inside," she said immediately. No pause, no question. She reached for the door, opening it wider, stepping back to make space. "It's cold out here. Please." Eleanor didn't move. The simplicity of it, the lack of suspicion, the absence of hesitation, caught her off guard in a way she hadn't anticipated. "You don't need to explain anything right now," Lena added gently. "Just come in and sit down." Atlas moved first. He stepped past Eleanor and into the house, slow and deliberate, his body still tense but controlled. His eyes moved across the room quickly, now taking in every detail before settling briefly on Lena again. Eleanor followed. The moment she crossed the threshold, something shifted. The air inside was warm, carrying the scent of fresh bread and something simmering. Soup, maybe. The space was small but lived in, filled with quiet signs of life. A pair of tiny shoes sat by the door. Crayon drawings were taped to the refrigerator in uneven lines. A wooden table stood in the center of the room, its surface worn but clean. It didn't look like much, but it didn't feel empty. "Sit here," Lena said, guiding her toward a chair near the table. "I'll get you some water and something to eat." Eleanor lowered herself into the chair slowly, her hands resting in her lap, unsure of where to place them. This wasn't what she expected. Not at all. Atlas stood near the doorway, still watching, his ears slightly forward, his attention fixed on Lena as she moved around the kitchen. He didn't relax. Not yet. Lena filled a glass of water and placed it gently in front of Eleanor, her movements calm, practiced. "There you go," she said softly. "Take your time." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the glass. It was cool, real. She hadn't realized how dry her throat had become until that moment. "Thank you," she said quietly. Lena nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile before turning back to the stove. No questions, no judgment. Just kindness. Eleanor sat there, her thoughts unraveling faster than she could gather them. The certainty she had carried all this way, the belief that she understood this woman, that she knew how this would unfold, was slipping through her fingers. Across the room, Atlas shifted slightly. His posture hadn't softened, but something in his gaze had changed. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was studying. And for the first time, Eleanor wondered if he was seeing something she hadn't. At the stove, Lena stirred the pot gently, the quiet sound filling the room. "You're safe here," she said without turning around. The words landed softly, but they stayed. Eleanor looked down at her hands, still wrapped around the glass, and felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not relief. Not yet. Something closer to disbelief. This was the door she had expected to close, and instead, it had opened. Eleanor sat motionless at the small wooden table, her hands still wrapped around the glass of water. The warmth of the room pressed gently against her skin, in a quiet contrast to the cool air she had walked through for hours. From the stove, the soft bubbling of soup filled the silence. Lena moved with calm efficiency, ladling broth into a bowl, tearing a piece of bread from a loaf that still steamed faintly. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. Everything she did carried a kind of quiet certainty, as though this moment required no decision at all. Eleanor watched her, not with the sharp, judging gaze she had once carried, but with something slower now, something uncertain. "You should eat," Lena said, setting the bowl in front of her. "It's not much, but it's warm." Eleanor looked down. The soup was simple. Vegetables, herbs, nothing elaborate. The bread was uneven, clearly made by hand. It wasn't the kind of meal she would have served in her own home, but it smelled real. "Thank you," Eleanor said, her voice softer than before. Lena nodded once and stepped back, giving her space. Still no questions. Eleanor lifted the spoon carefully, her hand betraying the slightest tremor. The first taste surprised her, not because of flavor, but because of what it stirred. It had been a long time since food felt like this. Not prepared, not arranged. Just given. Across the room, Atlas had moved closer. He stood a few feet away from Lena, his body angled slightly toward her, his eyes never leaving her movements. His posture remained alert, but not aggressive, measured, watchful. Lena noticed him. "He's beautiful," she said gently, her gaze softening as it rested on the dog. "What's his name?" Eleanor hesitated. For a brief second, the truth hovered on her tongue. "Atlas," she said. Yet the name slipped out before she could stop it. Lena smiled faintly. "That suits him." She crouched slightly, lowering herself just enough to be less imposing, her hand resting loosely against her knee, not reaching, not forcing. Atlas didn't approach, but he didn't retreat either. He simply watched. Eleanor's grip tightened slightly around the spoon. Even now, Atlas was deciding. The quiet stretched. Then, a small burst of movement came from the hallway. "Mom?" A child's voice, light, curious. A little girl appeared at the edge of the room, her hair tangled in soft curls, her socks mismatched. She paused when she saw Eleanor, her eyes widening not with fear, but with interest. "Who's that?" she asked, stepping forward. Lena stood, turning toward her. "She's a guest," Lena said simply. She needed a place to rest." The girl looked back at Eleanor, studying her openly. "You look tired," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. Eleanor blinked. "I suppose I am," she replied. The girl nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Then she noticed Atlas. Her face lit up. "Can I pet him?" Eleanor hesitated again, instinct rising before she could stop it. "He's particular," she said. Lena placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Let him come to you," she said softly. "Don't rush." The girl nodded seriously, then crouched down, holding her small hand out, waiting. Atlas watched her. Still. Then slowly, carefully, he stepped forward. Eleanor held her breath. Atlas lowered his head slightly, sniffing the girl's hand. The room felt suspended in that moment. Every movement slowed. Then he allowed it. Just the girl's hand rested lightly against his fur. A small smile spread across her face. "He's nice," she whispered. Eleanor exhaled, though she hadn't realized she was holding her breath. Atlas didn't stay long. After a few seconds, he stepped back, returning to his place between Eleanor and the rest of the room, still observing, still present. But something had shifted. Only slightly. Lena turned back toward Eleanor. "There's a blanket in the other room if you'd like to rest after you eat," she said. "You don't have to leave right away." The words landed gently, but their meaning carried weight. Eleanor looked up. "You don't even know me," she said quietly. Lena met her gaze, steady and calm. "I know enough," she replied. No elaboration, no explanation, just that. Eleanor looked down again at the bowl in front of her. Now the warmth had started to spread through her, slow and unfamiliar. It didn't erase the tension in her chest, but it softened it, just enough to make her notice. This wasn't what she had expected. Not the distance, not the dismissal, not the quiet, practiced rejection she had prepared herself to endure. Instead, there was this. A room that felt lived in. A child who spoke without fear. A woman who offered kindness without hesitation. And a dog who was no longer standing quite as rigidly as before. Eleanor took another spoonful of soup, slower this time. Across from her, Lena moved back to the stove, humming faintly under her breath as she stirred the pot again. No questions, no demands, no need to understand who Eleanor was or why she had come. Only the simple act of letting her stay. And Eleanor's chest tightened. Not with anger this time, but with something far more difficult to name. The certainty she had carried into this house was slipping, and in its place something unfamiliar was beginning to take shape. Atlas shifted slightly at her side, his body relaxing just enough that she noticed. He was still watching, but no longer with the same tension. And Eleanor realized, for the first time, that she might not be the only one being tested. The afternoon passed slowly. Eleanor finished her meal in silence, each spoonful taken with more care than the last. The warmth of the food settled in her stomach, but her thoughts refused to settle anywhere at all. They moved constantly, shifting between what she had expected and what she was experiencing. Neither seemed to match anymore. Lena moved through the house with quiet purpose, tending to small things, wiping the counter, folding laundry, checking on the children. Nothing she did felt forced. There was no performance in it, just rhythm. The little girl, Emma, as Eleanor had learned, sat on the floor with a box of crayons, occasionally glancing up at Eleanor with curious eyes, as if trying to place her somewhere in a story she didn't yet understand. Atlas remained close. He had taken a position near the wall, not far from the table, his body stretched out, but his head still lifted. His gaze followed Lena more than anyone else now, tracing her movements with steady attention. Not tense, but not relaxed either. Waiting. The sound of a vehicle approached from outside. Eleanor's shoulders stiffened before she could stop herself. The engine cut. As a car door slammed. Footsteps crossed the yard, firm, familiar in a way that struck something deep inside her chest. Marcus. She knew the sound of his walk, even now, even after everything. Eleanor's hands tightened slightly in her lap. Lena paused near the sink, her head turning slightly toward the door, but her expression didn't change. She simply wiped her hands on a towel and moved toward the entryway. Atlas rose slowly. His posture shifted, not aggressive, not protective, but alert again, as if a new variable had entered the room. The door opened. Marcus stepped inside. He looked older. That was the first thing Eleanor noticed. Not dramatically, but enough. Lines at the edges of his eyes, a tiredness in the way he carried his shoulders. His clothes were simple, worn from use, dusted faintly with dirt from the day's work. He set his keys down without looking up. "Hey," he said, his voice low, familiar. Hey, Lena replied, just as softly. There was something in that exchange, something steady, unspoken, not distant, not strained, just lived in. Marcus stepped further inside, brushing past Lena gently, his hand resting briefly against her back as he passed. A small gesture, but it lingered. Eleanor watched it closely. He hadn't done that in years, not even with her. Marcus finally looked up. His eyes moved across the room, taking in the table, the toys on the floor, the quiet details of home. Then they landed on Eleanor. He paused, just for a second. Eleanor held her breath. This was the moment. This was where everything would shift. Recognition, realization, something. But Marcus's expression didn't change, not in the way she expected. There was no flicker of familiarity, no hesitation rooted in memory, only a brief, polite confusion. Hey, he said again, this time directed at her. Didn't know we had company. His tone was neutral, respectful, distant, like she was exactly what she appeared to be, a stranger. Eleanor felt something drop inside her chest. She began, but her voice didn't follow through. Lena stepped in easily. She needed a place to rest, Lena said. She's been traveling. Marcus nodded once. Yeah, he said. That makes sense. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she came from. He simply accepted it. Just like that. Eleanor stared at him. This was her son, the boy she had raised, the one who used to call her for everything, who used to look at her like she held answers to questions he didn't even know how to ask yet. And now, he didn't see her. Not even a trace. Marcus moved toward the sink, washing his hands slowly, the sound of running water filling the silence that had suddenly grown heavier. Food left? He asked Lena. Still warm, she replied. Good. He dried his hands and sat down at the table just across from Eleanor, close enough that she could see the details of his face clearly, the familiar shape of his jaw, the way his brow furrowed slightly when he focused on something. All of it was still there. But something else had replaced what used to connect them. Distance. Not intentional, but real. He reached for the bowl Lena set in front of him and began eating without hesitation. No awkwardness, no curiosity, just acceptance. Eleanor watched him carefully, searching for something, anything, that might suggest he felt it too. That somewhere beneath the surface there was recognition trying to break through. There wasn't. Atlas stepped closer to Eleanor, positioning himself beside her chair again. Not protective, but present. Marcus glanced at the dog briefly. Nice dog, he said casually. Yours? Eleanor nodded. Yes. Marcus gave a small approving nod. He's well trained. That was all. Eleanor's throat tightened. That was all he had to say. The room continued on as if nothing was out of place. Emma resumed her drawing. Lena moved quietly between the kitchen and the table. Marcus ate, occasionally speaking to Lena in low, easy tones about the day, repairs that needed finishing, something about a fence, a delivery that hadn't arrived. Normal, and everything was normal, except for the one thing Eleanor had come here to find. She sat there, invisible in plain sight. And for the first time, the idea she had carried with such certainty began to fracture. This wasn't just about Lena. It wasn't just about distance or influence or change. There was something else here, something she didn't understand yet. Atlas shifted slightly, pressing his side lightly against her leg. A grounding presence. Eleanor looked down at him, then back at Marcus, her son, sitting just feet away and seeing nothing. The realization settled slowly, painfully, like something too heavy to land all at once. She no longer knew him, and worse, he no longer knew her. The test she had created was unfolding, but not in the direction she had imagined, not at all. Eleanor did not leave that day. She told herself it was because the sun had already begun to dip and the walk back would be too long, that it was practical, sensible, but the truth was quieter than that. She wasn't ready to step back into the life she had come from. Lena didn't question her decision. "You can stay the night," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We have a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm." Eleanor nodded, unable to find the right words. That evening unfolded without ceremony. Dinner was simple. More soup, fresh bread, and something roasted from the garden. The family gathered around the table, their movements easy, unforced. Marcus spoke more than he had earlier, but not in long stretches. Just small observations, practical things. Emma talked the most. She told stories about her day, and about a bird she had seen, about a drawing she was working on. Her words tumbled over each other, unfiltered, unguarded. No one rushed her. No one corrected her. They listened. Eleanor sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, absorbing everything. This wasn't the life she had imagined for Marcus. There were no polished surfaces, no careful arrangements, no signs of ambition the way she understood it. But there was something else. Something steady. After dinner, Lena cleared the table while Marcus stepped outside to check something in the yard. Emma followed him, her small voice drifting back through the open door. Eleanor remained seated. Atlas lay near her feet, his body stretched out, his head resting lightly on his paws. For the first time since entering the house, he seemed calm, not fully relaxed, but closer. Lena returned from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "You should rest," she said. "You've had a long day?" Eleanor hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Lena replied gently. "You're just someone who needed a place to stop for a while." The simplicity of it struck Eleanor again. No judgment, no expectation, just acceptance. Lena led her down a short hallway to a small room at the back of the house. The bed was neatly made, a quilt folded at the foot. A lamp sat on a wooden nightstand, its light soft and warm. "It's quiet back here," Lena said. "You'll sleep better." Eleanor stepped inside slowly. "Thank you," she said. Lena nodded once, then turned to leave. "Good night," she added. "Good night." The door closed softly behind her. Eleanor stood in the center of the room for a long moment. The silence here was different from the silence in her own house. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of small sounds, the creak of the floorboards, the faint murmur of voices from the front of the house, the wind brushing against the windows. Life. Atlas entered quietly, settling near the foot of the bed. Eleanor sat down, her hands resting against the quilt. She had come here to observe, to test, to confirm what she believed to be true. But everything she had seen so far had unsettled that belief. The next morning began earlier than she expected. She woke to the sound of movement, soft footsteps, the faint clatter of dishes, a low voice humming somewhere in the house. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it came back. All of it. Eleanor sat up slowly. Atlas was already awake, his head lifted, listening. When she stepped into the hallway, the smell of breakfast greeted her. Coffee, something baking, something warm. Lena stood at the stove, her back to the room, her movements steady. "Good morning," she said without turning. Eleanor paused. "Good morning." "You can sit," Lena added. "It'll be ready in a minute." Eleanor moved toward the table, taking the same seat as the day before. Emma entered moments later, still half asleep, her hair uncombed, dragging a blanket behind her. She climbed into her chair without hesitation, resting her head on the table. "Morning," she mumbled. "Morning," Lena replied, smiling faintly. Marcus entered last, already dressed, his movements efficient but not rushed. He nodded toward Eleanor. "Morning." "Good morning," she answered. No, still no recognition. Still nothing. Breakfast passed quietly. Not silent, but easy. Lena poured coffee. Marcus fixed something on Emma's plate. Emma spoke occasionally, her energy returning slowly. Eleanor watched it all. This rhythm, this connection. It wasn't loud. It wasn't impressive. But it was real. Later that morning, Lena stepped outside to tend to the garden. Eleanor followed, unsure why. The air was cool, the ground still damp from the night before. Rows of vegetables stretched neatly along the soil, each one cared for with quiet attention. "You grow all this?" Eleanor asked. Lena nodded, kneeling to pull a few weeds. "Most of it. It's not perfect, but it keeps us going." Eleanor watched her hands move through the soil, steady, practiced, unafraid of the dirt. You weren't always here," Eleanor said carefully. Lena shook her head. "No." She paused, then added, "I grew up moving around. My mother got sick when I was young. I took care of her for a long time." Eleanor frowned slightly. "That must have been difficult." "It was," Lena said simply, "but it teaches you things. About what matters, about what doesn't." She stood, brushing her hands off lightly. "You learn to pay attention to people differently." Eleanor felt something shift inside her. Not a complete change, but a movement. A crack widening. She had spent years forming an image of this woman, of who she was, what she lacked, what she represented. And now, standing here, watching her move through the garden, hearing the quiet truth in her words, that image no longer held. Atlas stepped forward, was moving past Eleanor and toward Lena. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pause. He simply walked up and lowered himself beside her, resting near her feet. Eleanor stared. Atlas never did that. Not without reason. Lena glanced down at him, surprised but calm. "Well," she said softly, "I guess we're friends now." She reached down, her hand brushing lightly against his fur. Atlas didn't pull away. Eleanor felt it then. Not just confusion, not just doubt, something deeper. A realization she wasn't ready to name yet. The life she had judged, the woman she had dismissed, was not what she thought. Not even close. And for the first time since stepping onto that dirt road, Eleanor Whitmore began to wonder if she had been wrong all along. The thought did not settle easily. It lingered, had moving quietly through her mind as the day unfolded, touching everything she saw, everything she heard. It followed her back into the house, into the rhythm of small moments she had once dismissed without ever truly seeing. Eleanor stayed, not as a visitor passing through, but as something less defined. Time shifted in that space. Hours were no longer measured by routine, but by movement, by the sound of Emma's laughter drifting from one room to another, by the steady scrape of Marcus's boots across the porch, by Lena's quiet presence moving between tasks without drawing attention to herself. Eleanor found herself watching more than speaking, listening more than thinking. That afternoon, she sat near the window while Emma worked on another drawing, her crayons scattered across the floor. "What are you making?" Eleanor asked gently. "Oh, a house," Emma said, without looking up. Eleanor leaned slightly closer. The drawing was simple. 4 uneven walls, a crooked roof, stick figures standing outside. One was taller than the others, holding a smaller hand. "That's me," Emma said, pointing. "And that's Mom. And that's Dad." She tapped the last figure. "And that's you," she added. Eleanor blinked. "Me?" Emma nodded, as if it were obvious. "You're here now." The words were light, almost careless, but they settled heavily. Eleanor sat back, her chest tightening slightly. Atlas lay nearby, his body stretched out along the floor, but his attention wasn't on the room. It was on Lena. She stood at the counter, slicing vegetables, her movements slow and steady. There was no urgency in the way she worked, no tension in her posture, just presence. Atlas watched her, but not the way he had at the beginning. Alert, cautious, measuring. Something had changed. Eleanor noticed it slowly. The shift in his body, the way his muscles had softened, his breathing steady and even. His ears no longer stood rigidly forward. His gaze no longer scanned for threat. He was at ease. That unsettled her more than anything else. Later that evening, as the light began to fade, Lena stepped outside to gather the last of the laundry. Eleanor followed again, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. The sky stretched wide above them, painted in soft shades of orange and gray. The air carried a quiet stillness, the kind that settled at the end of a long day. Lena moved between the lines, folding clothes with practiced ease. Eleanor stood nearby, her hands resting at her sides. "You don't have to stay out here," Lena said, without looking up. "It's getting cold." "I don't mind," Eleanor replied. Lena nodded faintly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It simply existed. Then Lena said, quietly, "People don't always end up where they expected to be." Eleanor looked at her. Lena continued folding, her gaze focused on the fabric in her hands. "Sometimes life shifts things without asking, and you just adjust." Eleanor hesitated. "You sound like you've had to do that." Lena smiled slightly. "I have." She paused, then added, "More than once." Eleanor felt that same movement again inside her chest. Not a complete understanding, but something loosening. Atlas stepped out onto the porch behind them. Eleanor turned instinctively, just expecting him to come to her side. He didn't. Instead, he walked past her, slowly, deliberately, and settled beside Lena. Close, closer than he had ever stood near her. Eleanor froze. She watched as Atlas lowered himself to the ground, his body angled toward Lena, his head resting lightly against the edge of her leg. Lena looked down, surprised. "Well," she said softly, her voice almost amused, "I guess you've decided." She reached down, her hand brushing gently over his fur. Atlas didn't move. He didn't pull away. He stayed. Eleanor's breath caught. This wasn't a small thing. Atlas had always been certain, in people, in places, in moments. He trusted slowly, carefully. And once that trust was given, it didn't waver. Eleanor felt something twist inside her, a quiet, uncomfortable recognition. "You like her," she said softly, more to the dog than to Lena. Atlas didn't respond, but he didn't need to. Lena glanced at Eleanor, her expression thoughtful. "He's a good judge of people," she said. The words landed deeper than Lena could have known. Eleanor looked away, her gaze drifting across the yard, but she wasn't seeing it. She was seeing something else. All the moments she had overlooked, all the assumptions she had made, all the conclusions she had drawn without ever standing here, without ever looking this closely. Later that night, after the house had settled into quiet, Eleanor sat alone at the table. The lamp cast a soft circle of light across the wood. Atlas lay nearby, but not beside her. He was near the doorway, positioned where he could see both her and the hallway leading to Lena's room, watching, was not guarding, just aware. Eleanor studied him. "You knew before I did," she whispered. Atlas's ears flicked slightly. She leaned back in her chair, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The plan she had created, so certain, so clear when she stood in her own home, felt distant now, different. It had been built on something she had believed without question. But now, that belief was cracking, piece by piece, and in its place something else was beginning to form. Something harder, something quieter. Truth. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, her breath slow. For the first time, she understood that this test was never really about them. It was about her and Atlas. He had known it all along. Sleep did not come easily that night. Eleanor lay on the narrow bed, staring at the faint shadows shifting across the ceiling. Now the house breathed around her, soft creaks, distant movement, the quiet rhythm of people at rest. It should have been comforting. Instead, it pressed in. Every moment from the past few days replayed in fragments. Lena's voice, gentle, without hesitation. Marcus's face, familiar, but empty of recognition. Emma's drawing, simple, unquestioning. And Atlas, choosing. Choosing a place beside someone Eleanor had spent years refusing to understand. Eleanor turned onto her side, pulling the blanket closer, though she wasn't cold. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered into the dark. The words felt heavier than anything she had carried here. Across the room, Atlas lifted his head. He didn't move. He just watched. Morning came quietly. The same soft light, the same low sounds from the kitchen, or the same rhythm Eleanor had begun to recognize, but something inside her had changed. It wasn't doubt anymore. It was pressure. She stepped into the kitchen slowly, her movements more deliberate than usual. Lena stood at the counter again, pouring coffee, her posture calm as ever. "Morning," Lena said, glancing back with a small smile. "Good morning," Eleanor replied. Her voice felt different, thinner, Lena noticed. Not in a dramatic way. Just a slight pause, a longer look than usual. "You didn't sleep well," she said. It wasn't a question. Eleanor hesitated. "No," she admitted. Lena nodded as if that made sense. "Sit," she said. "I'll bring something over." Eleanor sat. Her hands rested on the table, fingers lightly curled, as if holding something invisible. Atlas moved in behind her, but didn't settle immediately. While he stood, shifting slightly, his attention moving between her and Lena. Waiting. Eleanor could feel it now, the weight of everything she hadn't said. Lena placed a cup of coffee in front of her. "Careful," she said softly. "It's hot." "Thank you." Silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, but full. Lena didn't return to the stove right away. Instead, she remained standing nearby, her gaze steady, thoughtful. "There's something on your mind," she said. Again, not a question. Eleanor let out a slow breath. She hadn't planned this moment. She hadn't decided when or how it would happen. But now, it was here. She began, then stopped. The words felt tangled. Atlas stepped closer. He sat beside her chair, his body still, his presence firm. Eleanor looked down at him, then back at Lena. "I haven't been honest with you," she said finally. Lena didn't react. She didn't step back. She didn't interrupt. She simply listened. Eleanor's hands tightened slightly against the table. "My name isn't..." She paused, the weight of it pressing harder now. "It's not what I told you." Lena remained still. Eleanor's voice grew quieter. "I didn't come here by accident." The room seemed to narrow around her. Every sound, every movement outside the house faded into something distant. "This was..." she swallowed. "This was planned." A long pause followed. Eleanor forced herself to continue. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore." The words settled between them. Lena's expression didn't change immediately, but something shifted. Subtle. Careful. Eleanor held her breath. Her voice faltered now. "I'm Marcus's mother." The silence that followed was different. Heavier. Marcus's voice drifted faintly from the other room, unaware. Emma's laughter followed it. Light and distant. Normal life. Still moving. But here, everything had stopped. Lena didn't speak right away. She didn't step back. She didn't show anger. She simply looked at Eleanor. Really looked. And for the first time, Eleanor felt exposed in a way she hadn't expected. Not because of what Lena might say, but because of what she might see. "I didn't recognize you," Lena said quietly. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't apologetic. It was just truth. "I didn't want you to," Eleanor replied. Her voice shook now. "I came here to test you. To test both of you." The words felt sharp in the air. "I thought..." She stopped. She paused, searching for something that didn't feel hollow. "I thought you had taken him away from me. That you had changed him. That you didn't belong in our family." Lena's eyes didn't move. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "So I needed to know," she continued, "who you really were. What you would do if you didn't know who I was. Her hands trembled now, and I thought I already knew the answer. Another silence, this one deeper. From the hallway, footsteps approached. Marcus. He stepped into the room mid-sentence, something about to leave his mouth, then stopped. He saw Lena. He saw Eleanor. And something in the air told him everything had changed. "What's going on?" he asked. Lena didn't look at him. Not yet. Eleanor turned slowly. Her heart pounded. "Marcus," she said. His name felt unfamiliar on her tongue now, and he frowned slightly, confusion flickering across his face. "Yes?" Eleanor swallowed. "It's me." The words barely made sound, but they landed. Marcus stared at her. Really stared this time. Something shifted in his expression. Uncertainty, disbelief, a slow, dawning recognition that didn't come from appearance, but from something deeper. "What?" he said quietly. "It's me," she repeated. "Your mother." The room fell completely still. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. His eyes searched her face, trying to reconcile what he was hearing with what he was seeing. "That's not," he started, then stopped. Eleanor felt everything inside her unravel. "I'm sorry," she said. The words came quickly now. "I didn't trust you. I didn't trust her. I thought I understood everything, and I was wrong. I came here pretending to be someone else just to prove something that wasn't even true." Marcus stepped back slightly. Not far, but enough. "You lied to us," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "Yes." Lena remained where she stood, silent, still, unreadable. Atlas moved then, slowly. He stepped between them, not blocking, not guarding, just present. Eleanor opened her eyes again. Everything she had held on to, every certainty, every belief, was gone. All that remained was this moment, and the truth she could no longer carry alone. No one spoke. The silence that followed Eleanor's confession settled into the room like something physical, heavy, unmoving. Even the small sounds of the house seemed to withdraw, as if they understood they no longer belonged here. But Marcus stood a few steps back, his hands at his sides, his posture rigid in a way Eleanor had never seen before. "You," he began, then stopped. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes shifting between her and Lena, searching for something that would make sense of what he had just heard. "You came here like this?" he asked finally. "Pretending to be, what, a stranger? Just to test us?" Eleanor nodded. There was nothing else she could do. Marcus let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's unbelievable." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Lena still hadn't moved. She stood near the counter, her hands resting lightly against the surface, her expression composed, but distant now, as if something had quietly withdrawn from behind her eyes. Eleanor noticed it immediately. That absence. It was subtle, but unmistakable. "I didn't know how else to see the truth," Eleanor said, her voice careful, fragile. "I thought if I came as someone you didn't recognize, I would finally understand who you've become, who she is." She glanced at Lena. Lena didn't react. Marcus shook his head slowly. "So instead of coming here like a normal person, you decided to lie?" The word landed harder than the others. "Lie." Eleanor flinched slightly. "Yes." Marcus looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't even know what to say to that." The room felt smaller now, tighter. Eleanor took a step forward, then stopped herself. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "About her. About everything." Lena's gaze lifted slightly at that, but only for a moment. Then it lowered again. "You don't get to decide that now," Lena said softly, and it was the first thing she had said since the truth came out. Her voice wasn't angry, it wasn't sharp, but it was distant, measured, Eleanor felt it more deeply than if Lena had raised her voice. "I'm not deciding anything," Eleanor replied. "I'm just telling you what I see now." Lena nodded once. "But you didn't come here to see," she said. "You came here to confirm what you already believed." The words were quiet, but precise. Eleanor had no answer. Marcus exhaled slowly, pacing a few steps across the room before stopping again. "You stayed here," he said, more to himself than to her. "You ate with us. You slept in our house, and the whole time—" He looked back at her. "You knew who we were." Eleanor nodded again. "Yes. And you let us treat you like that." The question hung in the air. Not accusatory, but searching. Eleanor swallowed. "I needed to know if you would," she said. Marcus stared at her, then shook his head. That's not how family works." The word family felt unfamiliar now, like something that had been used incorrectly for too long. Atlas shifted slightly, stepping forward again. He stood between them, not blocking, not interfering, just present, his body calm, his gaze moving slowly from one to the other, holding something steady. Marcus noticed him. "He's the only one who hasn't changed," he said quietly. Eleanor looked down at Atlas. "He saw something I didn't," she replied. Marcus didn't respond. The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of things that couldn't be undone. Lena turned away slightly, moving back toward the stove, not because she needed to, but because she needed something to do, something that made sense. Eleanor watched her. "I hurt you," she said. Lena paused, her back still turned. "Yes," she answered simply. No hesitation, no softening, just truth. Eleanor felt it settle into her chest. "I thought you had taken him away from me," she continued. "I thought you had changed him into someone I didn't recognize." Lena turned now, her expression calm but steady. "He did change," she said, "but not because of me." Eleanor's breath caught. "He changed because life did," Lena added. "Because responsibility does that. Because people grow into who they need to be." She stepped closer. Not confrontational, but direct. "And you didn't stay close enough to see it happen." The words were quiet, but they landed with more weight than anything else. And Eleanor looked down. She couldn't argue. Marcus leaned against the wall, his arms crossed now, his posture closed. "I don't know what you expected," he said. "That we'd fail some kind of test? That we'd prove you right?" "I didn't know what I would find," Eleanor admitted. "But I know what I found now." Marcus let out a slow breath. "And what's that?" Eleanor hesitated, then answered honestly. "That I didn't understand your life," she said. "And I didn't try to." The room fell quiet again. This time it wasn't as sharp, but it wasn't resolved either. Just suspended. Lena moved back to the table, adjusting something that didn't need adjusting. Her movements were steady, controlled, but distant. Marcus stayed where he was, his gaze no longer searching, just fixed, as if trying to process something that refused to settle. Atlas lowered himself slowly onto the floor between them. Not tense, not alert, just present. Waiting. Eleanor stood there, her hands empty, her certainty gone. She had come here to uncover something, and she had. But not what she expected. Now all that remained was the distance she had created, and the uncertain space between what had been broken and what might still be repaired. No one left. That was the first thing that mattered. Eleanor had expected it. Some form of ending. A door closing. A line drawn. Something final. But the house remained as it was. Still. Breathing. Lena returned to the kitchen without another word, her movements steady but quieter than before. Marcus stayed near the wall for a long moment, then pushed himself upright and stepped outside, the screen door closing behind him with a soft snap. And Eleanor stood alone in the center of the room. Not dismissed. Not welcomed. Just There. Atlas rose slowly and walked to her side, pressing lightly against her leg. Not as reassurance, but as presence. Eleanor exhaled. She didn't try to speak again. She understood now. Words wouldn't fix this. Not today. The afternoon passed in fragments. Eleanor found herself at the sink, rinsing dishes that Lena had left behind. No one had asked her to. No one had stopped her. She simply began. The water ran warm over her hands, the quiet rhythm grounding in a way she hadn't expected. Lena moved around her, not avoiding, but not engaging either. Their shoulders nearly brushed once and both paused for a fraction of a second before continuing. No apology. No resolution. Just movement. Outside, Marcus worked in the yard longer than usual. Eleanor could see him through the window, repairing something along the fence line. His movements were precise, controlled, but there was tension in them, something unspoken. She watched for a moment, then looked away. Later, Emma returned to the table with her crayons, as if nothing had changed. She glanced at Eleanor, then back at her drawing. "You're still here," she said. Eleanor nodded. "For now." Emma seemed satisfied with that. "Good," she replied simply, and continued coloring. The simplicity of it struck Eleanor again. Children didn't measure things the same way. They didn't carry the same weight of expectation, of history, of judgment. They just accepted what was in front of them. As the sun dipped lower, the house settled into evening. Dinner was quieter than before, but Marcus returned inside, his clothes marked with dirt and effort. He washed his hands, his movements slower now, as if each action required more thought than it used to. He sat at the table without speaking. Lena served the food. Eleanor waited. No one told her where to sit. She chose the same chair as before. It felt right. Atlas lay beneath the table this time, not near the doorway, not watching from a distance, between them. The meal passed in near silence, not uncomfortable, but careful. Marcus spoke once or twice. Short answers, nothing more. Lena responded when needed. Emma filled the quiet spaces with small observations, her voice light, unaware of the weight in the room. Eleanor listened. She didn't try to explain again, didn't try to justify anything. She simply stayed. After dinner, she rose without being asked and began clearing the plates. Lena watched her for a moment, then stepped forward. "I've got it," she said. Eleanor shook her head gently. "I know," she replied, "but I can help." A pause. Then Lena nodded once. "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. But it wasn't rejection either. And for now, it was enough. The days that followed moved slowly, deliberately. Eleanor stayed, not as a guest, not as a stranger, but not fully as family either. Something in between. She woke early, helping with small tasks, setting the table, folding laundry, carrying water from the sink to the garden when Lena asked for it. She didn't take over. She didn't assume. She waited. And when something needed doing, she stepped in quietly. Marcus watched, not openly, but carefully. Yet his distance remained, but it softened at the edges, just slightly. A nod here, a brief glance that lingered a second longer than before. He didn't speak about what had happened. Not yet. But he didn't avoid her either. Lena remained steady, unchanged on the surface. But there were moments, small ones, where something shifted. A question asked without hesitation. A task shared without pause. A glance that held just a fraction longer than before. Nothing dramatic. Nothing declared. Just space. Space where there had been none. Atlas changed too. The tension that had followed him since the beginning was gone now. He moved freely through the house, no longer positioning himself as an observer. He belonged here, and somehow, that made it easier for Eleanor to stay. One afternoon, as Eleanor stood beside Lena in the garden, after pulling weeds from the soil, Lena spoke without looking up. "You don't have to keep proving anything," she said. Eleanor paused. "I'm not trying to prove anything." Lena nodded. "I know." She brushed dirt from her hands. "But you are trying to stay." Eleanor looked at her. "Yes," she said quietly. Lena met her gaze then. For the first time since everything had come out, there was something softer there. Not forgiveness, but understanding. "That matters," Lena said. Eleanor felt something ease in her chest. Not completely, but enough. That evening, Marcus lingered by the porch as the sun set, watching the fields stretch out in the fading light. Eleanor stepped outside, unsure if she should. He didn't turn, but he didn't walk away either. She stood beside him, leaving space between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Marcus said quietly, "You really thought you had to test us?" It wasn't a question. Eleanor nodded. "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "That must have felt pretty certain." "It did." A pause. "And now?" Eleanor looked out at the horizon, the light fading, the day ending. "Now I think I didn't understand anything at all." Marcus was quiet. Then, "I didn't recognize you," he said. Eleanor swallowed. "I know." "That doesn't feel right," he added. "It doesn't." Another silence. But this one felt different. Less sharp, less distant. Just unfinished. Marcus nodded once, then turned slightly. "Dinner's ready," he said. It wasn't much, but it was something. Eleanor followed him inside. Atlas waited at the door, not watching, not guarding, just there. And for the first time since she had arrived, he wasn't choosing a side. He was choosing the space between them, where something new was quietly beginning to take shape. Weeks passed, not in dramatic shifts, not in sudden transformations, but in quiet, steady changes that settled into the rhythm of the house. Eleanor no longer counted the days. She woke when the light came through the curtains, not because of habit, but because she wanted to be part of the morning. The sound of coffee brewing, the soft footsteps in the kitchen, the low hum of Lena's voice. These became the markers of time. She moved differently now, not as someone visiting, not as someone observing, but as someone learning. The first morning, she stepped outside alone. The air felt sharper than she remembered. The garden stretched before her, but rows of green and earth that had once seemed too simple to matter. Now she saw the work in it, the care, the patience. She knelt slowly, her knees protesting, and pressed her fingers into the soil. It was warm, alive. Behind her, the screen door opened. Lena stepped out, carrying a small basket. "You're up early," she said. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I'm starting to understand why." Lena nodded, handing her a pair of gloves. "Tomatoes need picking today." Eleanor took them. No ceremony, no hesitation. Just continuation. Across the yard, Marcus worked near the fence again, his movements steady, his focus quiet. He glanced up briefly, meeting Eleanor's eyes. For a second, then he nodded. It was small, but it was real. That was how everything moved now. Small, real, earned. Emma ran across the grass, her laughter breaking through the morning air, her energy untouched by the complexities that had once filled the house. "Grandma!" she called. The word landed differently now, not as something assumed, but as something chosen. Eleanor turned, her chest tightening, not with doubt, but with something softer. "I'm coming," she replied. Atlas followed close behind her, always close, but no longer watchful in the same way. He moved freely now, his body relaxed, his presence steady. He didn't stand between them anymore. He didn't need to. That afternoon, Eleanor sat on the porch beside Lena. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the yard. The sound of Marcus and Emma drifted from somewhere beyond the fence, their voices easy, unforced. For a while, neither woman spoke. They didn't need to, or the silence was no longer heavy. It was shared. Eleanor rested her hands on her lap, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I almost left," she said quietly. Lena turned slightly. "When?" "The first day," Eleanor replied. "After you opened the door." Lena smiled faintly. "I'm glad you didn't." Eleanor nodded. "So am I." Another pause, then, "I didn't see you," Eleanor said. "Not really." Lena didn't interrupt. "I saw what I thought you were," Eleanor continued. "What I needed you to be to explain everything I didn't understand." Her voice was steady now. "I thought you had taken something from me, but I never stopped to ask what you had built instead." Lena looked out across the yard. "We all see what we're ready to see," she said. Eleanor let that settle. It felt true. Atlas stepped onto the porch and lowered himself between them. Not closer to one, not closer to the other. Just there. Eleanor looked down at him. "You figured it out before I did," she murmured. Lena glanced at the dog, then back at Eleanor. "He doesn't carry expectations," she said. "He just responds to what's real." Eleanor smiled softly. "Yes," she said. "He does." They sat there as the light shifted, the day slowly giving way to evening. No rush, no urgency. Just time moving forward.
Later, as Margaret joined them on the porch, leaning against the railing, Eleanor felt something settle inside her that hadn't been there before. Not certainty, but peace. Not because everything had been finished, but because something had been opened. Something real. She looked at her son, then at Lena, then at Atlas, resting quiet between them. And she understood, finally, what had been there all along. Sometimes we don't misjudge others because they hide who they are. We misjudge them because we never truly look. Eleanor didn't just find her way back to her son. She found the part of herself she had lost along the way. The part that could finally see without judgment. And sometimes that's the hardest journey of all, not changing others, but learning to look again with an open heart. If you were in Eleanor's place, would you have done the same or chosen the different path? I really like to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if this story stays with you, there are more like it waiting for you here.